Aaron Schatz was the one MVP voter that did not vote for Lamar Jackson as the award winner. And today he joins us to break down his decision and a lot more coming up now here on this bonus episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, coming to you from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thanks so much for being here, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. Free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube. You can hit that like button, subscribe to the channel there, or in audio form if you're listening wherever you get your favorite podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow along there as well. We're a 5-day-a-week Ravens podcast, plus bonus content like today, bringing a Ravens news, analysis, updates, and so much more, even through the offseason, year-round on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time Matt Creighton account. Use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. We are back here, and this is a bonus episode here. Obviously, the big news of Thursday night was Lamar Jackson winning the MVP award, but he won it 49-1. There was one MVP voter that did not vote for Lamar in first place, and that was Aaron Schatz of FTN and the creator of DVOA. And he was getting a lot of flack for his decision. I mean, the whole consensus throughout most of the season for a lot of people is Lamar was the unanimous winner, but Aaron believed it was Josh Allen. He went with Josh Allen first, Dak Prescott second, and Lamar third. And I decided, let's bring Aaron on to talk about it, to get his viewpoint. In this episode, it was never intended for me to be, because look, Lamar's my pick for MVP. He was my pick for MVP. But it was to get Aaron's point. So it wasn't for me to say, oh, well, this and that and this and that. It was just to hear how Aaron went through his process and figure out why he went the way that he did with that decision. So without any further ado, let's get into our conversation with Aaron Schatz. Aaron, obviously, I know that your decision was a big one in terms of the MVP. Now, Lamar still won the award, but it was 49-1 in terms of Lamar getting first place votes. You were the one, and I know you've kind of taken on, and you've kind of embraced the villain role a little bit on Twitter, putting Taylor Swift lyrics out there. And, you did vote for Mike McDonald. You wanted to make that clear for assistant coach of the year too. But Lamar here, obviously the one vote, meaning he is not the second, two-time unanimous MVP, which would be the first time in history. Obviously, Tom Brady won it unanimously, and then Lamar in 2019. And you obviously, you're the creator of DVOA, and you're very big into advanced metrics. Plus, obviously, you're over there at FTN Fantasy. So just to start off, for people that might not know about advanced metrics or what DVOA actually is, before we get into the specifics of Lamar, can you kind of give a mini crash course almost of what DVOA is and why you value it so highly?
Yeah, first of all, I apologize if there's noise behind me. For folks who don't know, I'm in Las Vegas at the convention center where they have the media stuff for the Super Bowl. DVOA is very simple. It looks at the success of every play based on the down and distance, and then compares it to a league average baseline adjusted for situation and opponent. Anything better than 0 is good offense. Anything worse than 0 is good defense. And it basically gives you an efficiency that is normalized to that year. So it makes it easier to compare with past years, even though, the offensive environment of the NFL has changed over time. And it can be split up in lots of different ways. You can look at specific down or specific player or a specific red zone or something. So this is my main stat, and I've been using it for 21 years.
And it's been nationalized, really. A lot of people use it nowadays. And advanced metrics, I do think they give a better understanding to the basic stats. And I actually do feel like a lot of advanced metrics help the game. But for you, Aaron, I know this is the question everybody wants to know, because Lamar, it felt like for the majority of the season, he was the favorite to win the MVP, especially after the bye week when the Ravens went on that run. They had to play hot team after hot team, and they ended up just rolling through a lot of those. But your ballot was Josh Allen 1, Dak Prescott 2, and Lamar Jackson 3, and that's in line with what your all-pro ballot was. So, again, I'll just ask you from a general perspective, and then we'll get into it specifically. Why was Lamar Jackson not your pick for MVP this season?
The irony here, of course, is that I've been driving the Baltimore bandwagon for the entire season as far as Baltimore as a team, and we'll get to that, I think, in a little bit. But when it came to individual stats, starting with DVOA, okay, Lamar Jackson did not perform as well as some other quarterbacks this year. And it's not that it was close, okay? It wasn't like it was Brock Purdy and Josh Allen and Dak Prescott and Lamar Jackson were all in a tight little bind, and they were all close to each other, and it just so happened Jackson was fourth. He was fairly behind. And then I said, well, I'm not perfect. Not everything I do is perfect. Let's go look at some competing advanced stats. So I looked at PFF grades, and I looked at SIS total points, and I looked at EPA, and I looked at win probability, and I looked at ESPN QBR, and every single one of these metrics had Josh Allen and Dak Prescott ahead of Lamar Jackson, okay? And sometimes other players, sometimes Brock Purdy, for example, but each of these metrics includes rushing, okay? So we are looking at rushing and includes interceptions. So they are accounting for the 18 interceptions by Josh Allen, which are bad, right? Duh. But it accounts for all the good from all these players and the bad from these players. And every single one of these metrics put Lamar Jackson behind Josh Allen and Dak Prescott. So once I decided that I was not going to vote for Brock Purdy, and we can talk about that in a second if you'd like, it came down to those three quarterbacks, and I just could not. People talk about the eye test. They talk about the unquantifiable things that Lamar Jackson brings to a team. The thing is, both Dak Prescott and Josh Allen also passed the eye test. And they both also bring unquantifiable things to their teams, especially, I think, Josh Allen. So if that's a reason to vote for Lamar Jackson, it's a reason to vote for Josh Allen as well. And so once I, looked at the stats, it had to be Allen and Prescott. And then my choice was between the two of them, and Prescott played a very, very easy schedule this year, and therefore I went with Allen number one.
And you mentioned Brock Purdy, him, eventually not even being in the top three for you, pick Lamar over Purdy. But you mentioned that Purdy in some situations was ahead of Lamar in those advanced metrics. So for you, and you referenced it in your article, was it that much about, well, look, we saw what Garoppolo did last year and then what happened to him in Vegas?
Yeah.
Is it not the same question with Purdy where what would it be without the roster?
Yeah, basically, if you think about it, right, the difference between Buffalo with an average quarterback and Buffalo with Allen, or for that matter, Baltimore with an average quarterback or Baltimore with Jackson, is a larger difference than for San Francisco, even though the high for San Francisco is higher than the high for Baltimore or Buffalo. And just Garoppolo was the number one quarterback, number one in pass DVOA last year. So that's where we're starting from with Brock Purdy, right? We're not starting from zero. We're starting from best in the league and then adding on to that. And I think Purdy is a very good quarterback who has far outplayed his draft status, but he does not belong, I think, in the same conversation with Allen, with Prescott, with Jackson, and if he had not had an off year this year, with Mahomes.
And you bring up an interesting point there as well, because you mentioned, Purdy going to another team and, Baltimore without Jackson and the Bills without Josh Allen. But I am curious about what you feel like the teams would be. Let's say if you flipped Allen and Lamar. So you put Lamar on the Bills and you put Josh Allen on the Ravens based off of the talent around them this season. Did that have anything to do with your vote?
It's a hard thing to think about because the styles are different, right? I mean, even though they're both running quarterbacks, their styles are different. But I do truly believe that with Josh Allen at quarterback, Baltimore would have been very slightly better this year than they were with Lamar Jackson. And I did talk about in my piece, I know some people disagree with this. I think that Baltimore's wide receivers are better than Buffalo's wide receivers. I will admit, when I wrote my all-pro ballot piece, I didn't realize how well Khalil Shakir had done in the second half of the year for Buffalo. But Stephon Diggs dropped off so much in the second half of the year. I don't think it's a question that you would take either Zay Flowers or Odell Beckham over second half of the year Stephon Diggs from this season.
It is an interesting conversation, especially because Baltimore's been in that conversation.
And I know they lost Andrews, right?
Right.
I completely agree that's a big loss. Likely played very well this year.
Yeah, he was someone who stepped up in the absence of Andrews 1,000%. But Aaron, he also mentioned some of those other stats that, either Allen finished ahead of Lamar, Dak finished ahead of Lamar, and you listed out, I think, 10 of them. Were there any that you valued over the others where you looked at one and said, well, this one really means a lot to me in my vote? Or did you just look at the entire package and say there's just too much here for me to vote for?
I'm not going to hide it. The fact is my statistics matter the most to me. DVOA matters the most to me. And if there's ever anything's going to be a tiebreaker, it's going to be my stats. But it was the whole picture of all these different stats. Like, for example, Kevin Cole does an adjusted EPA, where he adjusts EPA based on charting from my company, FTN Fantasy. FTN Data is the charting, to look at things like dropped passes and yards after the catch, to try to adjust for the fact that a player like Purdy is getting so much help from his teammates. And in that stat, I believe that Dak Prescott was 1, Allen was 2, Purdy was 3, and Jackson was 10th. And that does account for rushing, and it does account for interception. It accounts for everything. Now, the only thing that most of these stats do not account for is the fact that the presence of Lamar Jackson opens things up for the Baltimore running backs because of the fear of Jackson keeping the ball on handoffs. And that is absolutely worth something. But if it's worth something to Baltimore, it's also worth something to Buffalo.
Still a lot of MVP talk with Aaron on the way as we continue to dive into why Aaron voted for Josh Allen and even Dak Prescott over Lamar Jackson for the MVP, as he was the one vote that did not secure Lamar Jackson as second unanimous MVP in history. Over Lamar still took the award home anyway. Coming up, we're doing that and more coming up on Locked On Ravens. First, this episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood is the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to RRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years with 3% matching on transfers and subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC. Member SIPC is registered broker-dealer. And this episode is brought to you by Game Time. There's a lot that I could do with an extra $100 in Vegas if I was there for the big game, whether it would be going out to a great dinner, putting it all on red. There's a lot out there. I've never been to Vegas. I want to go, so I'm just kind of imagining all the possibilities. Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And right now, all users get $100 off when they buy a big game ticket with code Vegas100. With current last-minute deals, all them prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And Game Time, even though there are no more playoff games in Baltimore, there are a bunch of concerts in the area, and Game Time can hit you up for those. Plus, the Orioles starting up soon. That's really exciting. Game Time has views from all the seats in the venue, and Game Time's a ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. Plus, they're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on your tickets with zone deals. You pick the section, and Game Time picks these for big time savings. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Right now, all Game Time users get $100 off a big game ticket with code Vegas100. Terms apply. Just download the Game Time app and use code Vegas100, VEGAS100 for $100 off a big game ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time to the last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. We're going to dive right back into our conversation with Aaron Schatz, as he did not vote for Lamar as the league's MVP, and we're just going to continue to get his perspective on why he voted the way he did and more now. And in terms of elevating the run game, you mentioned this, and I think it's interesting because with Lamar, it's almost like the eye test type of thing where he just defenses gravitate towards him. Not that they don't to Allen or don't to, not to those guys too, because they do. But for Lamar, there is such a fear factor whenever there's a decision to be made there. And so Lamar, I know a conversation point in Baltimore is he could throw for 165 yards and the Ravens could win by 25 points. They did that a couple of times where Lamar, from a basic baseline pass yard perspective, obviously based off of other MVPs and other quarterback play in the past, he wasn't up to those passing touchdown levels and passing yard levels. Obviously, I think that's where advanced metrics and advanced stats like DVOA come in. But how big of the eye test factor was? You mentioned that it was also a factor with Allen and with Prescott. But
yes.
in watching Lamar, what did you see from an eye test perspective?
I mean, first of all, I think some of the receivers early in the season, they were dropping passes terribly. Late in the season, they made some amazing catches. The Miami game had some, if I remember correctly, Likely had like a one-handed grab by the sideline maybe.
Yeah.
Like some really good stuff from the receivers. I mean, listen, I fully agree with the film people who say that Jackson has really improved the processing, the moving to his next read, the throwing from the pocket. The numbers definitely show that throwing deep outside passes was much better this year than even 2019, right, which was previously his best year. And may I add, by the way, I did not have a vote in 2019, but if I had, I would have voted for Lamar Jackson number one. Absolutely was number one that year by all these numbers. But I think that the eye test also shows that Josh Allen and Dak Prescott are super impressive. And I think that the eye test does hurt Purdy a little, and Tua Tagovailoa a little, and Jared Goff a little bit. And I think that that's okay.
And to me, I feel like with Lamar, there have been so many narratives about him and all the stuff that goes into what his game is today. And you mentioned the turnover part of it. I mean, Josh Allen, you talked about it at the beginning there, 18 interceptions. That's not a good number. Lamar had 7, Dak had 9. But to a lot of people, and I kind of was of this, interceptions are just interceptions. But you mentioned that, interceptions have a different level of gravity to them, in your opinion, in terms of, how far was the interception thrown? What happened after the interception? It's a curious point to me. Can you kind of go in depth on how you grade out interceptions and why maybe some of Josh Allen's interceptions in your eyes weren't as bad as some other quarterbacks?
Right. The idea is the longer the interception, the shorter the return, the less downfield the return will go, right? If you throw an interception at the line of scrimmage, that sucker is much more likely to get pick sixed than if you launch it 30 yards downfield, okay? So the average Allen interception came on a distance of 26.4 yards. That was the longest in the league, and the only other quarterback over 20 was Jordan Love at 22.5. By comparison, Brock Purdy's average interception came at a length of 9.7 yards. Those are much more damaging interceptions than the Allen interceptions.
And so in terms of weighing that aspect versus the actual, damage of an interception in general, did you believe that for Josh Allen, there were enough, I guess in your metrics, okay interceptions where it was far enough down the field to outweigh the other metrics of, hey, he had those 18 interceptions on
yes.
him?
Well, okay, so it's more like his play. Okay, so it's a combination of the interceptions. 18 still is bad. He still had more negative value from interceptions than Jackson did. But then he had all this positive value that outweighed the negative value. And the other thing is he took very few sacks, which are also a negative play. Right, and you have to consider that as well. Allen's ability to avoid sacks. Sacks are a very quarterback-dependent stat, despite the presence of offensive linemen. And Allen was the best in the league at avoiding them this year.
And yeah, because you're right. Negative plays, and Lamar had a fumbling issue early in the season. Now he definitely cleaned it up, but I do think that turnovers are such a big part of the game. Josh Allen had a lot of them, but the fact also is in the run game, and it's both quarterbacks, right? Josh Allen and Lamar. That there has to be some level of account taken into that with both players, because it's not just they have X amount of passing yards and that's the only value they bring to their team. Obviously, it's the rushing yards, the rushing touchdowns, and the fact for Lamar specifically that Gus Edwards had, I believe, 13 touchdowns this season, a lot of them coming from inside the 5. So if that takes away from the general, he could have had a rushing touchdown here, 5 more passing touchdowns here as well.
So Jackson's worth something like 91 expected points added this year. And Kevin Cole estimated that the value, if you look at what the Baltimore running game has done in games with Jackson compared to with Jackson not in the game, he estimated that Jackson's effect on the running game was worth an additional 10 to 15 EPA, which raises him up, but not to the same level as Allen, Purdy, and Prescott.
So, okay. So then in terms of the running game and what Baltimore did on the year, I mean, obviously we saw in the Asian Championship game is what got them there, and they didn't use it in that aspect. But what do you feel about with Lamar and some of the things that he did in terms of the quote unquote mediocre games? I kind of mentioned it earlier because you mentioned that the charting of, well, Lamar had more towards the line of mediocre and Josh Allen had more towards the line of, oh, this was a really good game. But was there anything that you put in terms of the schedule that Lamar played and the schedule that Josh Allen played as well?
Look, there's a reasonable argument that we should take into account games at the end of the season more than games early in the season. I don't believe in that. I feel that you are voting for the MVP for the entire season, not for the last month and a half. But if you want to argue that Lamar Jackson was the MVP of the last month and a half, yes, because that's when he had his best games. But he had a lot of those games that were like kind of slightly above average in the first couple months.
And I mean, the offense was figuring stuff out. And it was a new system and everything, but I think we saw as the season went on, and especially after that bye week, the
Miami game was incredible, man. There's no way to besmirch that Miami game. That was an unbelievable performance.
Yeah, Lamar likes playing the Dolphins. He's had a couple of those crazy.
That's one of the top 10 games ever in team passing DVOA in a single game.
Yeah, it was unreal, and
like,
it was a big spot.
In 43 years.
It was a huge spot too. I mean, I think people forget, especially because how Miami kind of fell off injury-wise as the year went on. But that was essentially for the number one seed in the AFC, at least it was. And then Miami obviously fell off the cliff there. But Aaron, in your estimation, with everything that you put together in terms of your argument for your vote, was there anything that Lamar could have done, or what else could Lamar have done in your eyes to boost up that MVP? Or was this just, hey, you know what, Josh Allen was that good,
played better? I mean, he just if he had just been a little bit better. Passing wise, really, I mean, let's put it this way. If the advanced stats had Purdy, Allen, Prescott, and Jackson all really close together, I definitely would have probably talked myself into doing Jackson. The problem is that he wasn't fourth by a little bit. He was fourth by a good amount. Or he was, not even fourth, right? He was ninth in Dakota. He was 10th in adjusted EPA. He was 7th in pass DVOA, right? It's not like he was right behind these guys.
And I also think that an interesting point in the entire MVP argument is head-to-head battles and head-to-head matchups. Obviously, with Allen and Prescott, Lamar didn't play those two head-to-head. And obviously, you mentioned it. You're voting for the entire season in your eyes.
I don't care about head-to-head. I'm not really interested in head-to-head battles at all. I'm voting for over the entire season.
Right, because I was curious because, he played Tua, he played Purdy, but obviously the top two. So it was something that some voters do keep in mind, but I mean, in terms of Allen and Prescott, that wouldn't have necessarily mattered.
And let me point out again, we talked about this. There's no award for best team, right? We decide best team with this little tournament where the best team doesn't always win because it's one and done, and there's a lot of randomness. We don't get to give an award to the best team. The best team was the Baltimore Ravens as a team, right? Because they had good coaching and because they had Justin Madubuike and they had Roquan Smith and they had Kyle Hamilton. And, you can go on and on about the players that they had and the quality of those players on defense in particular, and special teams were above average. And so this is nothing against the Ravens as a team. It's just a question of Lamar as a player. You're voting for the most valuable player, not the best team.
So with that, I assume that just like head-to-head record, you're not putting into account anything with the overall team record. That also had nothing to do with your vote.
No, because how much you contribute to your overall team record is shown in advanced stats. Like, for example, win probability added is directly how much you contributed to wins. Now, of course, Jackson was lower in that because the defense contributed so much to wins that by the time you got to the second half, there was no win probability for Jackson to contribute because the defense had kicked so much butt in the first half, right? So, but if that's what you want to go by, he's like 11th.
And it's interesting, too, in terms of the Ravens and how good they were, because it felt like he was the national favorite for a really long time, especially once the offense kicked into gear here. But did you have, like, was there a specific game or moment where you wanted to sit down and look at all these stats and kind of figure out, well, this is where I'm going to go with my vote, and kind of talking to people in the league? When did you kind of know that, I'm this is not Lamar's thing and I might be the only one?
It's gradual. It's gradual. Like, I'm thinking about my vote all year long. So when the San Francisco game happened and everybody sort of crowned him as the favorite because Dak Prescott had like a bad game the week before, and so all of a sudden we'd moved on from Prescott, I went and looked at my numbers and I said, I don't think he is the guy. I don't think he's the guy. And then he had the great Miami game, and I'm like, that was great. I still don't think he's the guy. Like, I was looking at it every week, so it wasn't like there was a week where I sat down and decided, you know what, he's not the guy. Like, I was looking at it every week. During the season.
A lot of MVP talk there from Aaron, and rightfully so. But in the final part of the show, we're going to move a bit away from that for a little bit and talk about the Ravens' historic year and what Aaron saw from his numbers. Stay tuned. A lot to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by Nissan. You're the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further. Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. They have class-exclusive Google built-in as your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-size crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes 2024 Nissan Pathfinder. That has room for up to 8 in expansive cargo capacity and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower with 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. And this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. They're the easiest and most exciting way to pick daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 stat projection with players and watch their winnings roll in. And the big game is right around the corner. Prize Picks is the easiest, most exciting way to turn every game-changing moment into 100 times your money. As little as 4 correct picks, you can turn $10 into $1,000. That expires, of course, post the big game. If Patrick Mahomes throws more than 1 yard in the big game, you win on Prize Picks. And for this big game in particular, I'm taking Christian McCaffrey more than 100% over on Prize Picks for the 49ers. So you can go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL for a personalized match up to $100. And don't forget, if Patrick Mahomes throws for more than 1 yard in the big game, you win on Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL for a personalized match up to $100. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. We're back here, our bonus episode of Locked On Ravens here on Saturday. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. If you're enjoying the content, be sure to subscribe on YouTube. Follow along in audio form. It's the same show, both audio and video. If you're an everyday listener, really appreciate you checking in each and every day here on the show. If you're new to the channel, new to the show, welcome in. Hopefully you're enjoying the content. You can hit that subscribe button, hit that follow button, wherever you're listening. If you're somewhere in the middle, you find yourself coming back, you might as well hit the subscribe button, the follow button, right? It's right there. It's free. So really appreciate everybody. We're continuing our conversation with Aaron Schatz. We had a lot of MVP talking there. I'll move away from that a little bit in the final part of the show. We'll get back to it, but we'll talk about the Ravens' historic year, what he saw from the numbers and more. For you, I am curious, taking the MVP vote out of it and, everything about the MVP aside, your overall thoughts on Lamar as a player. What does he think he's done over the course of his career? And I mean, how impressive have you been with the growth? Because you kind of talked about that at the beginning of the show.
He's definitely grown as a passer, despite the fact that the numbers were better in 2019. I don't understand why the psychology of why certain players struggle in the playoffs, or is it just complete randomness? There's an argument to be made that it's just complete randomness. He certainly did not struggle against the Houston Texans, right? But I mean, we all, at this point, what Lamar Jackson needs to do to go to the next level is he's got to win in the playoffs. He's got to play well in the playoffs, even if he doesn't win, although to most people he needs to actually win. But I don't know how to do. I can't say to you, this is the thing that Jackson needs to do different to be better. I don't know how much better he can. I mean, he's very, very good. He could probably, there's little bits here and there where he could, if it was just a little bit more accurate here or a little whatever. But the big thing is the playoffs, and I have no answer for that.
Now, in talking about, the playoffs, as we just talked about a little bit earlier, and obviously just then, with the AFC Championship game, the Ravens run the ball 16 times total. Some of those were just scrambles, so not even designed runs. And then you have 6 total to the running backs. I mean, based off of your metrics and what you saw from them as a team in 2023, how shocking was it for you to see the game plan unfold that way in a game where they were only down 10 at the most?
As somebody who was bluntly rooting for the Ravens, infuriating. It really was. I don't understand the game plan at all. They ran Gus Edwards early on and got something like 12 yards on that run, and I was like, all right, here we go. And then nothing. And I don't understand. I don't understand it at all. And I'm certainly hoping San Francisco does not follow in their footsteps, because San Francisco also has a real impressive, right? The Baltimore was the number 1 running game this year by my numbers. San Francisco was the number 2 running game this year by my numbers.
And I think it was that shocking where it just felt like Baltimore got punched in the mouth early and panicked because they thought Mahomes was going to put up 30 on that defense.
And the defense played so well, right? The first couple of drives, you were like, oh my God, Mahomes is slicing and dicing these defenses. Like
right.
Kyle Hamilton is a missing attack. Like, what's going on here? And then the defense cracked down. And the defense played well enough in the second half that the offense should have been able to come back. And without that Zay Flowers fumble, a lot in the NFL depends on randomness. If that fumble bounces back into Flowers' hands, they're on the 1-yard line, they score, it's 17-14 in the fourth quarter. Things are very different. I hate to say this, fans don't want to hear about the randomness, but there's a lot of randomness, and it just went against the Ravens.
Literally, a ball could bounce a certain way, and it could end your season or define your season, and that's some of that randomness you're talking about right there. But Aaron, you were very vocal throughout the entire season. You were kind of in shock and awe at how historic the Ravens, by your numbers and by DVOA, was, especially on the defensive side of the ball, who you've mentioned throughout the show, were just on a whole different level. I mean, what impressed you the most, especially regular season Baltimore Ravens football this year, and how good they were?
Yeah, they didn't have one of the greatest defenses of all time. But the thing is, they were just good at everything, right? The Ravens were top 7 in pass offense, pass defense, run defense, and special teams. There are only 6 teams in my whole database that managed to do that. Like, that is incredible to be that well-rounded. And also, I feel really impressed with Mike Macdonald and what he was able to do as far as getting pass pressure and sacks without his young edge rushers, right? Owa played a few games, and Ojabo hardly played at all. And like what they got out of Clowney and what they got out of Kyle Van Noy and what they got out of just scheming pressures, it was just really impressive. So the Ravens were this team that played a hard schedule. They played the 5th hardest schedule in the league, and then went out and walloped all these good teams on their schedule. And that is the best sign of a championship team, is destroying the other good teams in the league. It's not a complete stunner that they lost. I mean, history is filled with teams that have very, very high DVOA that lose in playoffs, whether it's the 07 Patriots or the 2010 Patriots or the 87 49ers or the 2019 Saints. Like, I can give you a list of teams. It does happen. And I predicted before the playoffs, I said between San Francisco and Baltimore, one of these teams is going to lose before we get to the Super Bowl, and the other team is going to win the Super Bowl. We'll see whether I'm right or not. But Baltimore is the one that went down.
And you mentioned how good, the consistent, in seemingly every single category. But was there one metric maybe that wasn't as good as you thought it would be, or maybe stood out to you as an outlier in terms of it just not being good?
I know that for Ravens fans, they're worried about the run defense, but it was still 7th. Like, it was still good. It just wasn't as good as the pass defense. It's to me, I think a little bit the coverage, given the names of the cornerbacks other than Humphrey, you wouldn't have expected such good coverage out of like Ronald Darby before this season, or Millette. Those players were really surprising. And of course, I don't think Kyle Hamilton was surprising because everybody knew how good he was. He fulfilled all his potential. That was a hard all-pro vote. Because there were 3 clear first-team safeties, and you were only able to vote for 2. And I had to leave Jesse Bates on my second team so I could vote for Hamilton and Antoine Winfield.
So what was the deciding factor for that one? What ended you putting Hamilton?
That was kind of the eye test. I watched a lot of Ravens football this year. I really did. It's funny. Apparently, the Baltimore Sun wrote an editorial about me today, and they said, "Did you even watch the Ravens this year?" I watched a lot of the Ravens this year, and Kyle Hamilton just jumps off the screen.
He's that good of a player, and especially
good,
him being year 2
and
is also
so flexible,
crazy.
and you could do so many different things with him.
Oh, yeah, and it goes to the positionless. The league is going to positionless defense. It has for a little while now, and Hamilton, it literally fits that mold in every way you want. Now, you did vote for Mike McDonald. You made it clear you voted for Mike McDonald as the assistant coach of the year. Obviously, it went to Jim Schwartz, but what had you with Mike McDonald is your vote ahead of Schwartz?
Honestly, it was the Browns and Ravens wrestled all year for which team was going to be number 1 in DVOA. And whoever was number 1 was going to get my vote, and whoever was number 2 was going to get my number 2 vote. The Browns did not have the injuries on defense that they had on offense, right? We talk about all the injuries the Browns had. Mostly, and I don't know, I don't have numbers in front of me. I don't think they were more injured on defense than Baltimore was. It's offense where Cleveland was super duper injured.
Yeah, and there were so many injuries this season. Teams were hit hard. Cleveland was one of them, but I think even the Ravens, where their health was not measured by season-ending injuries this year as it had been measured in the past, where they lost guys this year for a month or 3 weeks or 2 months. And then by the time the playoffs started, it was, only J.K. Dobbins, Keaton Mitchell, and David Ajabo. Those are your 3 that are on injured reserve. And even though, look, we can say Mark Andrews was not healthy in that AFC Championship game, Marlon Humphrey, same thing. They were healthy enough to play, but they weren't necessarily full-strength guys.
Well, that's what we do with our adjusted games lost numbers, which I need to put together in the next few weeks, is that we account for when guys are on the injury list and play, but don't play at 100%. And that was the case with those guys in the game.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, you could definitely tell with both of those guys. Now, Aaron, I didn't see your vote for Coach of the Year. I know Harbaugh finished 5th, if I'm not mistaken, in that total. Where did you have him ranked, and what went into your decision?
I wanted to vote for 9 guys. There were so many good coaches this year. I didn't vote for Harbaugh. I voted for Kyle Shanahan, number 1. Under the idea that if Brock Purdy is not the MVP, then Kyle Shanahan is the coach of the year because of what he was able to get out of Brock Purdy. I put DeMeco Ryan 2nd, and I put Kevin Stefanski 3rd.
Yeah, there were a ton of guys this year. And McCaffrey.
I also wanted to vote for Harbaugh and Andy Reid and Sean McVay and Mike McDaniel and Shane Steichen, and I'm probably forgetting one. Yeah, it was a really good year for good coaching jobs. It
was. And McCaffrey won Offensive Player of the Year. And you're adamant, Aaron, that MVP is a quarterback award. So McCaffrey winning Offensive Player of the Year.
Think if they want MVP to go to another player, you have to change what it's called. You have to call it Best Player.
And in terms of that,
if you want Best Player at their position compared to the average at their position, you would have given it in the last few years to Aaron Donald and Justin Tucker.
Yeah, I'm telling you, there would be teams that would do crazy things to get Justin Tucker on, at least prime Justin Tucker, and I think he still is.
There was a year where I didn't have an MVP vote yet, but ESPN did a poll of writers for MVP where I put Justin Tucker on my ballot. I don't remember which year it was, but there was one year where the Ravens could not score a touchdown, and Tucker was just unreal. It was 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and we saw in the divisional round, I mean, multiple games lost due to field goals. I mean, to have a guy like Tucker.
He's the greatest, man. With Hester going into the Hall of Fame this year is a good reminder that you can put special teams people in the Hall of Fame. Tucker is so good that Tucker should be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He is so clearly, obviously the best player in history at his position that there shouldn't even be a question.
I'm with you. I'm 1,000% with you on that. And speaking of most valuable player, take out the fact, 2023 is its own season, 2022 is its own season. You do that based off of the season. But in terms of the most valuable player in the league, is that Lamar Jackson to you, or would you go somewhere else?
No, it's Patrick Mahomes. It's Patrick Mahomes, and then I think I would put Josh Allen second. And then I'd have some combination of Prescott, Burrow, Jackson third.
But in that way too, it is, you look to quarterbacks. I mean, that's what, because the position is so valuable in its own right, where you could talk about all those guys with Jackson, Mahomes, Burrow, Allen. If you take them off their team, I mean, we've seen it in Baltimore with Lamar twice in the past 3 years.
Not necessarily. Jake Browning.
Well,
where did that come from, dude? Like, seriously.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And now Callahan gets to work with Will Levis, so we'll see how that goes. But Aaron, I appreciate your time. Thanks for hopping on and giving your insight and your analysis on why your vote went the way it did, and also the other Ravens conversation. Are there any closing remarks you want to make about your vote?
Yeah. History in the NFL is filled with teams that did not win the championship in their best year, but won it a couple of years afterwards with the same nucleus, like the 2006 Colts, who were better in 04 and 05, or the Patriots, who were so good in 2007 to 2011 and then won in 14, 16, and 8, right? So the Ravens are not going to be as good next year as they were this year. But that doesn't mean they're not Super Bowl contenders. Absolutely. So don't lose hope.
Yeah. Look, whenever you have Lamar Jackson, you have a chance. And I know, again, that's why so many voted for Lamar as the MVP. You would have had my vote.
And I'm going to be – I mean, it's not quite as strong, but whenever you have John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson, you have an even better chance.
Yeah, and there's plenty of controversy, Aaron, in Baltimore about John Harbaugh and
He's great.
The tenure.
He's great. He is a great head coach, and you are lucky to have him.
Yeah, I think the analogy I made is if every team, just start over the league and you get all the coaches in a pool, I think there'd be probably 20 to 25 teams lining up out the door for.
You would get the young offensive superminds would all go first, and then of everybody else, Andy Reid and John Harbaugh would be the first people in.
Right, and not that Harbaugh doesn't have flaws, and obviously there's some stuff here with the game plan and stuff. But again, he is one of the better coaches in the league, and you got to be sure if you fire him, you got to get somebody in there that.
He's a great CEO. He's a great manager of the whole team. He hires coordinators to game plan.
Yeah, it's the delegation aspect, which I think he's good at. But Aaron, tell people what you're working on, where they can find you, and what you got coming up this offseason.
Right there.
Oh, there you go.
FTN is my site now. FTNfantasy.com/DVOA is my page. But also, get a subscription to FTN Fantasy in general. We already have our 2024 NFL predictions and projections. We already have best ball projections, and we do other sports. We do MLB, we do NBA, we do NHL, tennis and golf. There's all kinds of really good information there from fantasy to betting. So check out FTNfantasy.com. And my page is /DVOA. For all of Aaron's work, you can check out the link in the description. I appreciate him coming on, giving his 2 cents and giving his thought process. I mean, and look, it's different for everybody. Where this episode was never going to be I think this and I think that. No, this was to get Aaron's perspective into why he voted the way that he did. And he outlined it all there, whether we agree or disagree. I mean, look, Lamar's still my MVP vote, right? Aaron's MVP vote was Josh Allen. That's just how it goes. So again, appreciate him giving his perspective on the whole thing, and especially with him being essentially the villain in Baltimore right now, double appreciative, because he didn't have to do that with all the flack he's been getting for that decision. So whether you agree with the decision or not, it was how Aaron decided to vote. My vote's for Lamar Jackson. Your vote maybe for Lamar Jackson, but it's why, there are voters on the award. Everything is different, but Lamar Jackson does not get a second unanimous MVP in NFL history, but he does bring home the award anyway. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be right back here on Monday as we continue talking Ravens and moving into the offseason. And at that point, we'll know whether the Chiefs or the 49ers won the Super Bowl. Stay tuned. See you back here on Monday on Locked On Ravens.